I'm learning how to deal with my weight and
Prova. Mi sentite, Francesco? Ci senti? Ora sì? Prova. Prova.
Va bene questo? Okay. So, welcome to the second public event organized by the summer school of the Academy of Global Humanities and Critical Theories. And today, you know, this event is about the work of Allan Sekula, a video maker, a photographer, American video maker and photographer. And today we will try to have, you know, a sort of insight on his production, especially in relation to the topic of this summer school, that is the sea. Very particular topic, but if we consider the work of Sekula, we will see how talking about the sea, it means talking about a lot of things. When we were invited to organize this event, and I want to thank the Academy, Fondazione Gramsci, and FIU for inviting us and allowing this event to take place. And when we have been invited to organize this event, we immediately were happy to propose Sekula as you know, a sort of visual inquiry on the sea, on logistics, on globalization. As Into the Black Box, we started to study, especially logistics, some years ago. And incredibly, you know, logistics became in last years a field of studies, a lot of studies, like, you know, scholars like Deborah Cowan, like Brett Nilsson and Sandro Mezzadra, like Anna Tsing, used, you know, logistics as a gaze, a particular gaze on contemporary capitalism, as since the 60s and 70s, more and more the circulation became a key point in the reorganization of the whole global production. So no more circulation as a supplementum, as an extension of production, but the perspective from which to reorganize global supply chains. And in this sense, sea plays a fundamental role. When Sekula started his inquiry in 1985, he had two, more or less, how to say, standing point to confront, two myths in his words. The first was that sea was a marginal space. He said generally in this moment, during the 80s, sea is framed as a marginal space in front of the territory, the land. And the second myth, he said, is the connectivity. It was, you know, the origin of cybernetics, more or less. By the years, it started, you know, to be spread the internet, the World Wide Web. And so the idea that, you know, the knowledge society, the dot-com bubble, and immaterial labor. On the other side, Sekula was looking for imaginary and material geographies of advanced capitalism, in his own words. What does it mean? It means that in that moment, he was going in a way upstream. So he was looking for the spaces of globalization, the spaces of advanced capitalism, and which is the main space, according to Sekula, it's exactly the sea. As the sea connects the continent, as the sea is sailed every day by giant cargo ships, moving commodities, moving the containers all around the globe, and allowing us to live in a society of commodities. And if the sea is the forgotten space, to use the title of the movie that he has directed in 2010 together with Noel Burke, on the other side, there are invisible forces moving through this space. And I'm referring to labor force, human labor. It means that on one side, Sekula was doing, his visual inquiry on cargo ships in harbors. On the other side, the actors, the subjects of his photographies, also of his movie Forgotten Space, are in a way workers. So today we are here also as we are hosting some of Sekula works. In this other room, you will find a small exhibition we tried to set up in a way to connect part of the different works of Sekula on the sea, on logistics. Especially, we selected 3 works. First is Fish Story. Fish Story is mainly a book. It's more or less a project, but here you will find a book organized in 7 chapters. Each chapter is composed by photos and text. Sekula worked with a lot of medium. He was not only a photographer, I said also a video maker, but he was also a good writer, and with particularly ironic style in some of his writings. So this book is more or less the output of a journey he did between the end of the 80s and the beginning of the 90s, where he moved all around the globe, I would say. The book has chapters from Los Angeles to Veracruz in Mexico, to Europe, in cities like Bilbao, Gdansk, and so on. Then he moved to Asia, arriving to Hong Kong and Seoul. And in this book, he tried to trace, the different landscapes of advanced capitalism, especially sea, especially harbor, and especially containers. We will see this element of the containers that is, a fundamental element in his analysis. And the second part of the work is 2 other, an extension, I would say, of Fish Story. There are 2 sequences of projected slides, and you will find them on the screens, Dismal Science and Walking on Water, that were conceived apart from the book. While the book is based on what he said, a critical realism. So the idea that, in front of a disenchantment of the 80s, so he tried, it was upstream also in this, in his artistic approach. So he was trying to recover a sense of realism, but a critical realism. It doesn't mean, that photography is only taking a picture of the reality, but is investigating the forces behind the ordinary life. While if we go to take a look to the projections, to the sequence of slides, we will see a sort of disassembled movie. So it was trying to divide the different operations of the capital into blocks, but at the same time to give them, the idea of the movement, the idea of the unity. And the third part of the small exhibition is The Forgotten Space. It's a movie, or in his words, an easy movie that he directed with Noel Burke in 2010. The movie has been awarded at Venice Film Festival, the special prize from the jury. And in this case, after more or less 25 years from Fish Story, Sekula did again, more or less the same travel. He started from Los Angeles, then moved to Europe, to Bilbao and Rotterdam, and then finally arrived in Hong Kong, in Asia. To trace again, to inquire again the same geographies he already investigated 25 years before. And the movie is particular because the movie is a composition in a way of archive images, by directed images, and also by this narrating voice who is referring particularly to some interviews he did during the direction of the movie. And to conclude, why to talk about Sekula today? I want to give you, from my side, 2 reasons. First, globalization is nowadays, a very hot topic in the public debate. Especially we think about globalization as a status, while probably it would be better to talk about process or a sum of processes, different processes. And in this sense, the work of Sekula is a focus on some of these processes: the logistics, the role of the sea, the movement of industrialization and the deindustrialization that took place between, western part of the world and eastern part of the world. And nowadays, the point is how is changing globalization. We have seen how pandemic impacted on the global supply chains, all the problems, the disruptions in the logistics. And we are seeing like how also the war in Ukraine is impacting on our world towards a reorientation, of different economies in this moment, but also in terms of international relations, geopolitics, and so on. So to go back to Sekula's work, it means also to frame globalization as a sum of different processes, and at the same time to ask ourselves how these processes are changing nowadays. Second reason to take a look to Sekula, that is partially an answer also, on the first reason, how the situation changed since, the 80s and 90s until now. I found very particular reading some Sekula's statements, declarations, writings that he had in mind, especially in the 90s, the cybernetics as a counterpart. He said, we talk about immaterial labor, we talk about connectivity, but I want to go to see where is the human labor, how we realize effectively connections around the globe. Nowadays, probably, we live in a world a bit different. Probably we cannot separate totally, the digital realm and the material realm. They are more and more interwoven in a way. And we can see how they influence, each other. On one side, we may see how global trades, logistics, finance are more and more digitalized and organized thanks to digital technologies. But on the other side, we can see how cybernetics, in the words of 80s and 90s, digital capitalism, platform capitalism, is not totally immaterial. It has real material conditions like data centers, like transoceanic, streams of data and information. So probably, there is also the need to update our view of globalization to the current challenges. And to go back to Sekula is also a way to ask ourselves, what's the point of globalization nowadays? So I stop here my introduction, and I will give the word to our speakers today. We have Martina Angelotti, that is curator and also director of Fondazione Ratti. And we have Massimiliano Mollona, that is a new professor of the University of Bologna. So welcome to Bologna, Massimiliano. And Massimiliano is an anthropologist. Especially, political anthropology, but also anthropology of art. So I will give the floor first to Martina and then to Massimiliano. Thanks again for joining us today, and thanks again to the Academy, to Fondazione Gramsci and FIU for giving us the possibility today to have this event.
Good evening. Hello. Thank you for the introduction and thank you for being here. I'm really happy and honored to be part of this conversation. Especially, I'm very touched by the city of Bologna, which is not the city where I was born, but it's a city that gave me a lot in terms of professionality and research for my work from a curatorial perspective. Because exactly in 2007, I started a project here in Bologna that was called, and it's still called, ON. That it's a kind of investigation between contemporary art and public sphere. So it was like a sort of gymnasium to practice many different kind of exercises together with artists, thinkers, and viewers that came here to investigate the territory and making works together. So thank you for hosting me. And I think I would begin by focusing on two specific aspects of Sekula work, which for me are quite essential to, let's say, understand better certain contemporary artistic practices that have changed and transformed during the last 20 years. And we know that the box, the container, somehow represents, as we have said many times, the measure of the global capital. And the artistic investigation on logistics and on or towards the presence and the symbol of the container is a form of a critical realism that seeks to generate some tools for understanding the transformation of that global capital. And but this attraction that contemporary art expresses towards logistics is also a reflection of an important aesthetic shift that emphasizes the orientation of art no longer in favor of a form, but of a critical and politically engaged art. So talking about Sekula, we need to present Sekula in this frame because he's one such an artist who addresses through photographs, films, texts, and also many other aspects that are related to the exhibition making, this attitude. So for me, his work articulates the images of logistics and the logistics of images in terms of disorientation and distortions of the labor body, and to integrate the struggle and the very intimate meaning of the struggle towards the disappearance of labor against the fetishes related by the photography of the capital space. And the forgotten spaces that you were mentioning before of the maritime world, investigated by Allan Sekula, are in fact those places of persistent, isolated, hidden work, but also loneliness and displacement from the domestic sphere. So while questioning many documentary conventions, Sekula continued to see photography as a social practice. So giving possible answers to the global issues. And two are the main aspects of its work and research. On one side, there is the refusal of abstraction in favor of a materialistic approach to the photography of the real. And on the other is the transposition from the formal art to the social art, which is a very important shift. Using his words, what we need is not, he said, a topography of abstraction, but a political geography, a way of talking with words and images about both the system and our lives within the system. When he pronounced these words, it was like 2003, and he was talking about a very important exhibition that happened in California in 1975. And the title of the exhibition was The New Topographies, Photographs of a Man-Altered Landscape, that mark a different, more detached and less speculative approach to the landscape representations, both in the United States and in Europe. I just wanted to show you the three images. One is the fly in the PDF. Okay, so this was the flyer with the name of the artists involved. And then I just put it two very famous pictures from this exhibition. One about Europe from Ilan and Irma Becker, and the other one is LA from Ed Rusche. So, I mentioned this show because I think that it was like puncturing the facts in a very good way. And so returning to Sekula works and its reverberation in the artistic practices, I would like to mention and maybe show you if we will have time later, some projects that we developed in a very specific frame that I was co-curating together with another Italian curator called Anna Daneri, and in collaboration with the Department of Sociology in Genova. The project was called TEU. TEU, as you know, is the measure of the container boxes. So it means 20-foot equivalent unit. And the idea was to create a sort of collaborative experiment that took its inspiration from Sekula, actually, and also took the way of investigation from Sekula itself. So the idea was to put together theorists, thinkers, sociologists from the university, together with artists and other thinkers, to collaborate in order to create different spaces of dialogue for investigating the concept of logistics and especially the transformation of the urban space connected to the presence of the volumes and the containers in the city itself. And how this presence contributed to change actually also the political and social attitude of living the city. In order to do that, we collaborated a lot with 20 or maybe more dockers reunited in an important union that exists since many, many years in Genova, regulated under the name of CULM, Compagnia Unica Lavoratori e Merci Varie, which is a company union of workers and different goods. that were involved in many different kind of activities we realized together with them. Also through the methodologies of the artists involved. And while designing this project and creating these synergies with the Dockers, it was already 2016. But curiously, in the same year, a British artist called Rebecca Moss was at that time on a 8,000-ton ship loaded with thousands of containers en route to Shanghai as the resident artist of a program of residencies called 23 Days at Sea, organized by a Vancouver an institution of contemporary art based in Vancouver. That aims, as the curator states, to bring artists into the global freight system. But shortly before returning to the mainland, the container ship on which the artist was traveling, the Hanjin Shipping Company from South Korea, declared bankrupt and could not return to port. It will be many more days at sea before the ship can dock at the port of Tokyo. So after this experience, she realized that this project, a film called International Waters, which is a single channel video work made in response to being stock, that tells the story of a bankrupt from the perspective of the workers on board and on the stationary ship, and combines different kind of interviews. I would like to show you just the, this is Genova, and some images from the port, which were inspiration for the Project EU. And this is a trailer from International Waters. No. That curiously starts with the same image of Sekula, a little bit displayed on the right. No, anche dal computer.
Over half of Hanjin Shipping's fleet has been ground to a halt.
Hanjin says 85 of the 141 ships it operates are under abnormal status, meaning they're not being allowed to enter ports around the world. Port authorities fear Hanjin won't be able to pay their docking fees.
Over half of Hanjin Shipping's fleet has been ground to a halt.
Hanjin says 85 of the 141 ships it operates are under abnormal status, meaning they're not being allowed to enter ports around the world. Port authorities fear Hanjin won't be able to pay their docking fees or will block ports as creditors try to seize ships to repay debts.
Land ho! You see the wind turbines? Yeah, we're gonna anchor There are two wrecked ships.
Wrecked ship.
Yeah, I mean, it's don't worry about it. Yeah, that are in the area. You can see them. They got little X's on them.
What?
So what will happen then when you stay here?
I don't know. I don't know what will happen.
You know, what is our function? I mean, I'm glad they do, because I think it's cool. You know, I think it's a million times cooler than being on a cruise. You know, I get to go up and talk to the captain and look at all the charts. And
But my problem is, of course, English is not my mother's language. But I think stupid is a perfect word for this one. Stupid, you know, or unbelievable. I think it's a better word. So what I understand is that Hanjin missed to pay since June all invoices for bunker, for pilotage, for tax service. So that's why now we have the situation. So especially now in this case, our vessel and also Vienna, they are arrested because of open invoices with the tugboat company. Okay, we got good luck. We are still free.
I don't know what will happen to us next. Maybe, I don't know. We don't know yet. Maybe we, if we discharge all the cargoes in Busan, then there's a possibility that we're going to Anchorage for, I don't know, months, maybe days, months, or I don't know.
Thank you. And so I think this project is quite like representative from the perspective of the real critique that Sekula was bringing out in the processes and the project he developed. And so back to TEU, the project I was mentioning before that we realized in Genova, other two artists involved in the project realized two other films connected to the same topics. One was envisioned this, I mean, the first project was realized by this artist, Danilo Correale, which is an Italian artist based in New York. And that realized this project from, that was called Equivalent Unit, largely composed by a materialistic attitude that put on the core of the work of the dockers and created a personal relation with them through different kind of workshops and sections of hypnosis and stuff like this, and questioning together the affective relationship that still binds the man worker and what remains of the commodity in the era of the containerization. Because the starting point and the first question he addressed to the dockers was, is it possible to imagine for you to love the container? And what's your reply? So all the film is about this recollection of perceptions around the presence and the life of the containers in the hands and in the head of the dockers. And the other one with the title Aquacalypse is a project by another artist, Italian, based in Berlin, which is named Riccardo Benassi. And it's a video that exploits the iconographic imaginary of the online video games on the practice of arbor labor. An articulated text that runs overprinted on images and tells the dynamics of goods and people's flows, the logistics and the relationship between the voids and the fullness, and how it's all related somehow to technological transformation that inevitably alterated our relationship and interconnections. And both of them are realized with a specific soundtrack, which is quite interesting in terms of methodology and in terms of artistic practice, because Danilo asked to a band, a heavy metal band, made by Docker's son, to invent like a proper soundtrack for the film. So I can just show you, like at the very beginning, it's like 1 second, if you would like. And the second one, the soundtrack was realized by a very important young underground producer of the new movement, a generation of rappers that is based and live in Genova, but he launched a lot of new like rappers around the nation. So both of them, without saying nothing, but they realized also like a very important relationship with the territory throughout the music interventions. So now to conclude, and then to give the words to Massimiliano, I just want to say that and to go deeper in the activation of these concepts and on these questions that were at the base of Sekula's work, I need to say that Genova is a logistical center of the international arms weapons trade. And every month, ships from the Saudi national company Bahari scale the port, carrying tanks, helicopters, and explosives. So since like 3 years, there is a collective of the workers from the port, which is called CALP, the Collective Autonomous Port Workers, that has been opposing this country's massacre of civilians in the war in Yemen for 2 years already, or 3 years, before the pandemic starts. And the passage of arms violates, they say, the law 185 of the 1990, which prohibits the export and transit to foreign countries in the state of armed conflict. So it's something that is quite present now also for other reasons. And one of the statements they use is, we cannot open our ports to arms, exports, and then close them to people fleeing war. So this refusal to make an anti-constitutional work and to be part of this logistic chain of that resonates in this last work that I want to show you. It's a photographic work realized by the same artist I was mentioning before, which is Danilo Correale, that asked to the same dockers who were collaborating with him for the realization of the film to pose in front of the camera with the arms the arms in this position to underline their refusal of the work. So these are just a small selection of the 100 dockers working with him. I think it's over.
I need to put my photos on. I don't know. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much, Mattia, Nicola, and Maurilio for the invitation and for the Academy and the Fondazione Gramsci and FIU. So I want to talk a little bit of the work of Sekula in relationship to what does it mean to research capitalism, and what does it mean to get involved really in long-term research on capitalism, and maybe even research interventions as the ones of Sekula. I've been working on this for 20 years, 25 years, and I've been all my fieldworks. I'm an anthropologist, but all my fieldworks have been basically on researching in big industrial sites. First in Sheffield, north of England, where I was looking at the industrialization. So already the end process of the industrialization. So I was there in the 1990s during New Labour, and I was looking at this kind of post-Thatcher landscape. And secondly, I've been researching in Brazil, following a kind of methodology that was very similar to Sekula's methodology, because it occurred me to go to Brazil when I saw that there was a rolling mill in Sheffield that was completely disused, and that was sold to Brazil. And so I kind of followed the rolling mill, and I ended up in Brazil to look at the other side, let's say, of this global process. So in a way, I'm addressing here you as a researcher and students and future possibly also activists in relationship to these issues, to really reflect on how, as an academic researcher, we can really look at capital or study capital without objectifying, and finding the right approach in terms of language and in terms also of how we situate ourselves in the space of capitalism. And that's why I think Sekula resonates a lot with me, because he's really looking at issues that are very central to this reflection. So how do you study capitalism when you are situated in a space as an individual researcher, and how you study capitalism in the current condition where there is this capital is logistical. And so where do you find the methodological tools? And lastly, what is your relationship with the subjects who operate in the world of capitalism, especially in relationship to labor? So is it enough to write a book? Is it enough to take images? How do you return this knowledge that you extract? And what is the really, let's say, the ethical problem linked to not only taking images, but also formulate narratives around capitalism? So in a way, for me, Sekula really encapsulates all these questions. And I actually didn't know consciously that my work was following invisibly his work until I was later, I looked at his amazing book, Fish Story, and also the film. So I think there are three issues. I've been asked to speak for 15 minutes, so maybe we can then talk a little bit more later. But I want to highlight just three issues linked to the work of Sekula. First is this, as Maurilio was saying, this debunking, this criticism about towards the idea that we live in a post-industrial economy, and that the sea is this kind of old-fashioned space. And so the issue is, how do you study capitalism in relationship to this notion of terraceous capitalism, this ongoing relationship between the land and the sea, and the difficulties of and implicated in looking at this ongoing tension between capitalism and the sea. And only recently, actually, this relationship has been highlighted also in relationship to the history of the slave trade, also in relationship to the tools of insurance and financialization that emerged during the slave trade. And so also to locate the notion of financial economy, for instance, to historicize it back to this notion of necro-speculation, this notion of speculation over the trade of brown and black bodies. So the notion of terrestrial capital is becoming more and more important and fundamental also to revisit a certain history, a certain economic history, taking in consideration the history of imperialism and colonialism. I think it's a very important point, which perhaps we can discuss more in relationship to the work of Sekula, which I think probably on this side is a little bit lacking something. But the other important thing is, I think is very important, is to relate capitalism to space. And Sekula starts Fish Story saying that, mentioning Engels, who wrote The Condition of the Working Class in England, imagining himself on a dock in London Bridge and looking at the difference between the open water near the channel and the crowded working class suburbs of London Bridge. And so in his mind, there was this, let's say, conflict or contrast between these two spaces that were reflecting also different political spaces. And so I think that the powerful component of Sekula is precisely to think, how can we think about labor, how can we think about class in between these spaces, in the kind of dialectical, in this dialectical space, in this logistical space. And the amazing thing about all this production, but especially of the forgotten space of the film, is precisely how he looks at labor in this, let's say, in this kind of fluid logistical space. He looks at labor, for instance, in the railway workers who transport the cargoes, in the truckers, and so really in much more in the logistic at the beginning, and then only later he goes into obviously the labor of the cargo workers. And the film is also very original in the way, obviously, reflects on putting interviews in the context of archival material, but also treating that as an essay, as a film essay, which doesn't happen very often when we talk about labor and we talk about capitalism. So the other important thing is how do you talk about categories that we always think in spatial terms, but also in very fixed spatial terms in terms of a logistic. So how you talk about a working class that is fragmented across the globe. You know, how you even address in a documentary way or research about a working class that comprises all these different kinds of labors that he finds across the way. And so the other very important issue is the relationship, obviously, between not only capital space, but also the work of a researcher, how you articulate the work of a researcher across a logistical space. In terms of logistical capitalism, there are also the issue very interesting. Sekula highlights, let's say, the issue, for instance, of using the flag of convenience, and so the issue of how labor is super exploited in these cargo ships, because obviously this flag of convenience company don't have legal or labor, let's say, restriction. But on the other hand, I think it's also useful to reflect the possibilities that logistical capitalists bring to labor organization, in the sense that there is also a possibility of workers organizing across logistical chains, which is something that obviously a lot of researchers have looked at, which is also important to highlight in this sector. But I think the thing that for me is more important to highlight here maybe is precisely his work as an artist. I was saying that when I do my research, I always set up processes of filmmaking precisely to try to reframe what the kind of knowledge that I produce as a researcher in relationship to my interlocutors that I live with, I interact with during my fieldworks. So I think that what Sekula is trying to say is how can we create a visual language that is not abstracting, that is not creating the same, let's say, function that capital creates, so the function of abstraction really of reality. And Sekula has done really interesting research on the function of photography in history. So he talks about photography as this tool of kind of bourgeois celebration, but also as a tool of policing, as a tool of abstraction. And also he compares actually the photos to the container. So the photo has the same, the same function of the container to capture, objectify, and kind of abstract reality on a single frame. So the interesting that Sekula does is try to set up processes through which we can look at capital outside the frame, which is also what Ariella Azoulay says in relationship to his critique of photography as an imperial technology. What she says is, how can we look at, let's say, imperial relationship outside the frame, because the frame is something that captures in time and space reality. And Sekula does that exactly in Fish Story, setting up this process of articulation of sequences, a combination of sequences with narratives, and what he's trying to show is that what is important is not to, let's say, capture the act of working, or the act of labor of the workers, but what is important is to capture the relationship that we can see, that the capitalist relationship that give value to that specific action. So his all work, it's very important for me also to reflect about on narratives of how you describe capital, when capital, actually you encounter capital when it's already an abstraction. And how can you do that relational work of creating images of capital that are complex, relational, and flowing. And so that's what Sekula says, that a research on labor has to be relational and has to be about the organization of images rather than the single image. And I think that he does that extremely well, not only in Fish Story, but also in the Forgotten Space. What I wanted to, let's say, to conclude is, well, I wanted to show these photos of Fish Story because I think that one of the techniques that he actually uses a lot is to try precisely to enter the kind of abstract and a little bit hallucinatory space of capital. And so a lot of Sekula's photos are about these objects that are actually quite humanized. So these are these objects that you can nearly see the hands of the worker in them, but they're really personal, really, they're made quite alive. And this is, there are a lot of these kind of close-ups of objects that become very intimate. And on the other hand, some of the postures of the worker seems to be a little bit fractured and a little bit abstracted themselves. So I mean, there are critics who have been writing about this, but I think it's also interesting to highlight how the work of capital is also to give life to objects and to dehumanize people. And so there is a lot of this dynamic in the work of Sekula that I think is very important, and he plays around with in Fish Story. I wanted to show an extract of the Forgotten Space. Actually, I wanted to show two extracts, and I'm talking about the extract I'm not going to show, which is the end of the film where he reflects on globalization, and he described this little town in Holland that is being swiped out from globalization, and there are only two residents that are left. And a reflection really about the fact that both the left-wing party and right-wing party oppose globalization, but the globalization is a national project. And so to kind of reflect about really the similarity of that time with the contemporary time, in the sense that there is it seems that globalization continues to be a top-down process and continues to be obviously, rather than, let's say, put in danger by the phenomena of war, of the pandemic, it seems to be actually reinforcing some of the global value chain. So to think really about what are the consequences of this historical moment on globalization. But the other one, I wanted to show this specific, as you know, the Forgotten Space articulates itself of 5 megaports. It's Lisbon, LA, Hong Kong, Rotterdam. And this is the sequence in LA, where he looks at this area around the port that have been cleared out. And unlike in Bilbao, where they've kind of developed a cultural front, here this space is really kind of inhabited by campervan, by unemployed. And so to me, this is a very strong sequence because it's about the forgotten space within the forgotten space. It's really one of these liminal spaces that very rarely it's filmed. And I wanted to show this sequence, especially 3 interviews. And then I'll comment a little bit on these 3 interviews.
Most of these people are like, I hate to say it, maybe I am too. They're like lost. It's like they don't have any direction and have no place else to go but right here. Well, I do. I just can't get the. I just can't get the. Oh, what word do I want to use right now? God, not motivation. I got plenty of motivation. I don't know. I just can't get out of here as of yet because of funds. Funds is what my main thing is right now. Yeah. he's a really good guy. Him and his brother both live out here. But I don't, it just, no, it's, I don't know how to really explain it. It's a different lifestyle. I mean, like for either one of you to come out here and live for, say, a month, it'd be rough on you. Straight up, it would be. No bullshit behind it. It would be rough. And it's like every night you lay down. Okay. Gotta get up tomorrow morning and go through it again. Whatever. Some days are good days. Yeah, I've had a lot of fun out here. A lot of fun. But other days are just like, damn it. The train tracks are right there. And people have done it out here. There's been 2 of them. Go ahead and kiss a train when it goes by. It'll take your ass out. Yeah, my mom's getting ready to roll. And the day she rolls, the day I roll. As a day I'm out of here. Yeah. So that's when my money comes in. Now I'm just gonna buy a trailer. And my ex-wife already has a pic out at the river. I've already saw a picture of it. Nice trailer for me. Hey, it's better than that goddamn tent. You know, it's like, hey, there it is. I can fish right off my patio. That's a nice place to live. You can live right on the water. I don't care where you live. If you live on water, you're living pretty good as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. I'm going to buy another boat and just fish my life away. Fish and drink my life away. That's all I want to do. You know.
I just felt that there wasn't anything for what the majority of us are out here, middle-aged men. You know, there were no starting programs, nothing like it. If I were to find a good job, how could I eat, bathe? You know, would I sleep in my sleeping bag next to the place I worked at until I got my first paycheck? And then what? Motel? It's expensive. And supposedly they're rehabilitating some old apartment buildings and whatnot. And it's for women and children. There are no homeless women and children out here. I mean, now it's happening because of the foreclosures, you know, on people's homes and whatnot. But at the onset of this, there weren't. They supposedly the money came that was supposed to be for the homeless. Here, some $3 million or something like that, and then more and more came from the federal government. And there are no programs like that. They come and they give toilet paper, you know, and bread, and they raffle with a ticket, you know, with the and if you're the lucky ticket, you get a motel room for 3 days, and you can only do it one time a year. Like if you win the raffle again, you have to turn it over to somebody else. You don't have it. I mean, what does that do? Nothing. Not, you know, some people here, it's become it's a way of life for them, you know, or they're just reprobates, you know, the definition of the word. They don't want to get ahead, and they're satisfied with, you know, with the way things are. I'm not. I don't want to be like this any longer. I've been like this for years.
This is like a slap in my face to me and my family. I'm not on drugs. I have these my dolls that I picked up, so don't think I'm kind of mentally ill or anything like that. I picked these up. I have a tent full of stuffed animals and dogs. You know, this is the only thing that I have to hold on to and to remember, for me to remember my children. I lost a lot and I'm homeless. I haven't seen my children since. I was unable to attend court because I had no transportation, and the court was way in San Bernardino. I'm way in Ontario, you know, and I lost out on my children. I haven't seen my children since, and this is since 2003, and here it is 2009. So I lost a lot. I'm hurt. I'm trying to figure out, am I gonna ever get the chance to be a mother again with my children that I already have? I don't have my children. I'm over here in the dirt. Getting darker and darker and darker. And my rig is because my hair comes out, you know, mysteriously, my hair comes out. And it wasn't like that at first, but when I get over here and I take my hair out to wash it and stuff, and it's coming out, you know, in patches, like someone is shaving my hair off, that type of stuff. And I've gotten overweight to where and I'm just starting to handle my weight, and in the hot sun, I can barely walk across to the corner without getting hot, having hot flashes. So I'm learning how to deal with my weight and my situation at the same time.
I wanted to show this sequence because this is a sequence that Christina Sharp mentioned in a book, In the Way, saying that the kind of voice that this woman represents is really very different from the other two voices. First, because the other two characters are able to locate themselves as a middle-aged unemployed man, or they're able to articulate their refusal to the conditions that the state is offering, whereas she is being taken away from her children, and all that she is trying to say is to tell to the audience that she's not mad, that she's okay, that she, you know, that she wants to see, she has the right to see her. Not she has the right, she's trying to convince that she's not mad, that she wants to see her children. So there is this kind of difference in the mode of address of these subjects that is very troubling, and that, let's say, forgets the fact that these are people who are systematically targeted by the state. They are systematically excluded violently. And moreover, Sekula never addressed the slave trade in fish story, even if he talks about the Middle Passage in chapter 2. And so there is this, and of course the slave trade, as Stefano Arni says, was the first logistical moment, the first kind of containerization of humans. So I'm saying this not to like mount a easy criticism, but just to realize how difficult it is to find this language of, let's say, that reflects this voracious capitalism, this logistical capitalism in visual terms, and how problematically is ethically not to find this language. And of course, there is a big discussion. Denise da Silva will be here in relationship to, you know, this kind of unpayable debt that she calls. So this kind of weight of history in not attributing value to black and brown bodies who were not humans, so they couldn't be holder of labor power. Obviously, these add another layer of complication. Not only is it difficult to represent what we can see in capitalism, but also it's difficult what we can see in what capitalism never showed. So the fact that the capitalism is also about exploiting people who don't have even the capacity to labor because they're not considered humans, and this is ongoing. Perhaps also the scene of the Filipino crew would have been different if this had been considered. But again, this is we also have to think that these conversations are evolving. So it's not necessarily a terrible criticism. It's just an open conversation.
Thank you, Massimiliano. Thank you, Martina. And I would say that we can open the floor for questions for our two speakers.
Prova, prova. Prova, 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 prova. Ah, si sente? Tu senti? Mi senti se parlo da qui? Ah, ok. Allora... Mi senti? Can you hear me? I think it's okay. Yeah, thanks for these wonderful reflections. I think was very powerful to see all of these images. And I wanted to go back to that issue of abstraction that you mentioned, because I think that, I mean, the value of this work is particularly powerful because it seems to me that it's able to confront capital on its capacity to abstract things. And so as finance does, as money does, even this image is kind of almost playing a signifier that then can universalize some messages, and so bring together different kind of materiality and different spaces and different form of labor. So I wanted to make this comment.
I don't know if there are other questions. Okay. Maybe if you want to answer, just to add to this comment, I was also impressed by the video you showed, Martina, as it's clear that one of the frame of the video, it's sort of homage also to Sekula, I guess, the one when we see this cargo navy, you know, with all these container, and about the abstraction, why? As especially in Forgotten Space, this is the only image that appear more than one time in the movie. And why? as in that sense, Sekula is, how to say, is figuring out global capitalism in the image of the container, in the picture of the navy, of the ship sailing the sea. And more or less, there is no main character, I would say, in the movie, but probably it's an abstract character, and it's personalized into. Maybe it's the translation. Okay, it's not a hacking. It's not. They are not hacking us. Okay. So that's why, just to say that, yeah, I know that maybe, there is on one side this element of the effective spaces, effective geographies. On the other side, there's attempt to find abstract images of global capitalism.
No, I'm saying that, yes, that image is exactly a quote of the Sekula's movie, and it's actually the abstraction of the capital, as you were mentioning. But in Sekula work, I think that there is this double dimension, which is on one side the idea of the abstraction, which is quite real actually, because the identification of the capital in the shape of the abstraction, as for example, using those images who are just like looking at the containers towards the infinite sea, is a kind of a statement. So it's real somehow. And then on the other side, there is the real essay or the real interpretation of the situation going on, especially related to the medium of the films and the photography as he used, that I think it's like the other part of the practice.
I just occurred me to relate to your comment in a different way, in the sense that there is a long tradition of filmmakers and photographers who look at abstraction as a visual issue. I mean, from the classic, the kind of Eisenstein onwards, as an issue of representation, and so as an issue of consciousness. And so one of the issue is really to use the visual for people who look at films or photography to reflect on this kind of relationality of capitalism, and the role of abstraction is very positive in that way. But in a way, this is still within the kind of visual paradigm that gives to aesthetic such an importance in reality, in relationship to reality. And there are a lot of people who think that the issue is not so much to think about realism as an aesthetic strategy, but realism more as a process-based strategy. And so we can see in some of the images that there is still the problem of him still being an author, still being an artist, and still having this power, for instance, of misrepresenting someone. So, for instance, in my work, I always shift from an issue of aesthetic to an issue of process. And so, for instance, in Sheffield, I've been setting up this. Yeah, we should talk. In Sheffield, my theme was about working with steel workers and trying to edit together the film, which came out an absolutely horrible film. But at the end was a really special film that had this kind of strange aesthetic, because it really reflected the process and could be shown in workers' club, trade unions, in art venues. So yeah, I think the debate now shifted to another level. And once you put realism at the level of process, I mean, there are film scholars like Lucian Najib who talks about realism as a process. And you can realize that people from the Global South are much more involved in this kind of processual aesthetic. But this is an issue, right? This is in a way, seems so far away, from the present.
Do we have other questions or comments?
Hi, can you hear me? Can you hear me okay? Okay. It's on? Is it okay? Okay. Yeah. So this is for either Martina or Massimiliano. I'm wondering how we can think with Allan Sekula about questions about the environment. You know, I mean, so much of the work is about logistics and capitalism, but I think one thing that a lot of us are thinking about now is what logistics and capitalism are bringing to bear. You know, for example, the carbon output of something like 2-day shipping is just monstrous. So it's more of an open question. I think he mentioned some things about toxicity, you know, at some point in his work, because that was of the era, you know, 80s and 90s. But, you know, thinking with him in our present, I'm wondering what methodologies or maybe what art, you know, Martina, you mentioned that project of man-altered landscapes. I'm wondering, you know, what other things might we look for with the environment and thinking with logistics and capital?
Well, I mean, I speak from the point of view of being a researcher. And yes, of course, the environment can bring a lot in terms of, for instance, elemental philosophy into the debate about labor, about capital. And yes, this is super important. And actually, again, this is a new perspective that's so important when you add the kind of non-human component to labor power or to capital, especially in relationship to oceans, where there are amazing research that are being made, or in relationship to chemicals, toxicity of chemicals and the agency of chemicals, works of Povinelli on trailings. And yeah, it's definitely, again, it opens a new perspective. And of course, there are a lot of artists who've been working in that direction. I'm thinking about Stephanie Hessler, also reader on and, you know, the T21 Foundation in Venice. There is a lot of refocusing also beyond the representation of labor as embodied in humans, or labor as or class as embodied in containerized, let's say, in humans. Yeah.
No, I was mentioning that exhibition of the altered man landscapes from the 1975, because I think it's a kind of interesting shift in terms of what he was mentioning about photography of abstraction. So we go back to the point that we were saying before, because representation of landscape at that time through the photographies, especially with this huge attempt of redescribe an entire map, geographically talking, because it was about Europe and USA. So like the two huge context and different kind of visions in terms of landscapes as well. There was like an attempt to recreate a sort of topography, as it was the title, and as Sekula addressed as a problematic question, because it was saying that we don't need the topography, we need like the political reconstruction of the landscape. So in that sense, Sekula was trying to enlarge a little bit the meaning of landscape, referring to that exhibition that was about the industrialization and transformation of the cities around the countries. And through the gaze of huge and big artists like Irma Becker, or that are very, very precisely connected to the kind of passage of the era of industrialization produced and envisioned by this huge industry context, abandoned or like desolated in the landscape. And then on the other side, there was Ed Ruscha, that of course, I mean, it's another perspective on the landscape, which is a little bit unmonument, or I mean, from one perspective could be considered like a sort of unmonumentalization of the landscape itself, especially in America at that time, where the concept of monumentalization of landscape was at the base of the political strategy to envision a constant future of the nation. No? So that's why I think it's interesting to think about that kind of reconsideration of the landscapes connected to the medium of the photography, because it's exactly something that Sekula was like considering while thinking another approach and thinking another modes of reproducing the reality through the photography as a medium.
Thank you very much for this really challenging panel. Just a short follow-up on Giulia's question that raised the issue of abstraction. And Martina was rightly saying that this abstraction is real. I think we can add to that that there is not only one abstraction at stage in Sekula's work, because on the one hand, we see the abstract power of capital to produce space at work. But on the other hand, and behind this abstract power, there is the power of abstract labor. So abstraction is split, is antagonistic, if you wish. And I think this has important implications, not only for the investigation of capitalism, but also for the critique of capitalism. Because Sekula's work invites us, shortly put, to criticize capitalism from the angle of abstraction, from the angle of this double abstraction and of the tensions between the two abstractions that I mentioned. You know, Sekula shows in the forgotten space that logistics has a disruptive effect on communities, on works of labor and life. But he does not articulate a critique of this disruptive power of logistics from the angle of, let's say, the concrete. What it does is rather to focus on the constitutive power of logistics in order to get a kind of angle that allows him to criticize in a potentially more productive way even the disruptive effects of logistics. And I think this is a very important lesson by Sekula that we should keep in mind, and we should try to further develop this method.
I think I agree. That's a very important point. And in fact, I was thinking about what John Roberts say about representation of labor. Every time you criticize capital from the point of view of labor, you actually reproduce the point of view of capital. So in reality, no film should be made about labor unless you take what the point of view that you are describing, the point of view of the abstracted point of view. I think that's a very good point. And, I guess the only problem is that you are still an author individual who are taking the point of view of a reality that it's abstracted itself. So it can be risky, but I think his work systematically does that in a really good way. Yeah.
I don't know if there are other questions, but in the meanwhile, give me the possibility to thank also Sekula Studio, that is the foundation that is managing the heritage of his work. And I have honestly to say that they have been really kind to give us the opportunity to have all the materials and supported a lot this event. So I'm very grateful to them. And just to add another point that generally the eye of Sekula on these imaginary and material geographies was not, I would say, neutral generally. He always had an engaged view on these kind of processes. There are other parts of his work, that where we may feel these more directly, especially during the period of anti-globalization, alter globalization movement around the new century. He was very interested also in the protests around the world, in the United States, in Seattle, and so on. So his approach was not like, realism in terms of framing, part of the reality. That is something that also the photography overcome after the 70s, the idea that there is a truth that you have only to take, but on the other side, the aim was, I would say, to take apart, to try to highlight some antagonisms in the society. That's why I was saying also in the introduction that to take a look to his works is also a way to question ourselves on our part inside these kind of global processes. So if there are no other questions, I would invite you to take a look to the other room, to the exhibition, to ask if you have questions on, on the movie or the pictures. And I want to thank you everybody for joining us today. And next event, public event of the Academy will be on Monday, same time. So thanks again, and have a nice evening. And thanks again to Martina and Massimiliano for joining us.